Welcome to a football show Monday edition. Paul Kuharsky, Braden, Gall, 440 Sports Network. Of course, brought to you by Sinkers Beverages and Shotgun Willie's Barbecue. And the Titans are picking first overall because they were the worst team in football. I have one question, Paul, for you that we're going to discuss today on the show that I think is the only real question that needs to be asked about this organization and what could be the most important offseason in franchise history. So we'll get to that. We'll also answer the only question that I think matters about the number one pick in the draft. So I've got all the answers, Paul, and we're one day into the offseason. How do you feel about that?
Well, what am I going to do for the 3 months and 30 days? That doesn't leave me with a lot.
Look, the best thing the Tennessee Titans have done, the best thing the Tennessee Titans have done for its fans, number one, and for all of us in the content world, was lose to the Texans and be the number one pick in the draft. So thank you.
I disagree.
Oh, really? Okay, we'll discuss.
I mean, if they had the 7th pick, there'd be a hell of a lot of debate. With the first pick, there's a limited amount of debate outside of us creating trade scenarios.
Okay, well, we shall see, because what it does do, though, is it makes this offseason be one of the most important offseasons in franchise history. We'll get to that, as well as what you learned today at Brian Callahan's, I guess, season-ending press conference following the lockers. You had a chance to talk to the players as well, so we're going to get to all of that. If you want to get into the comment section, please do so. Please jump in over there. On YouTube, you can go thumbs up, turn on the notifications. If you are listening on the podcast app, please give us 5 stars and share the show. Tell somebody about it. Post it on a social media app of your choice so that when people know about Titans content and Titans coverage, they know about Paul and me hanging out. You can also check out paulkuharsky.com as well as the Paul Kuharsky podcast. So lots of stuff to do. Of course, special thanks to Sinkers Beverages and Shotgun Willie's Barbecue for keeping this show free and available for you twice a week, Mondays and Thursdays. So I see Eddie and I see Predemption and I see Matt already in the comments. We do appreciate all you guys jumping in already, and we'll take questions. So we'll be doing that, of course, throughout the course of the show. But again, the most important question this offseason, we're going to do that. I have the only player the Titans should take at number 1, and of course, locker clean out. So, Paul, let's start with I don't know if there's anything we need to say about the game. Do you have anything to say about the game, Paul?
No, just that, there's some people who are hell-bent on the idea that they tanked that game. Some people that are hell-bent on that they tanked down the stretch. That was not the Titans tanking offense. Outside of Joshua Kelly getting a carry. That's a tank carry. That was the Titans offense. That's the Titans 2024 offense. Can't score, struggles to move the ball, 7 out of 10 possessions, 1 first down or 0 first downs. That's what this team was. Really bad. Didn't have to tank, didn't have to do anything special to have no success against the team that benched its starting quarterback after he helped their running back get to 1,000 yards and their receiver get to 1,000 yards. That's how bad they were. No special tanking necessary.
I will throw in one fluky explosive play. Also seemed to be sort of part of their MO this year. Like Calvin Ridley catches a fluky downfield pass on the goal line. And of course, yesterday we had the pride of Washington State, Tay Martin, catch a fluky explosive play in front of a safety that was about to intercept a pass.
Safety, standing there like it's a bread basket coming to him, or a poorly positioned fair catch on a ball that was intended for Bryce Oliver.
Yeah, exactly. Sam says, Will throwing a touchdown pass on accident is the perfect microcosm.
By accident. I do not accept anyone saying on accident. It's just purely wrong.
It's bad. It's bad grammar, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. It's not MLA or AP style. All right, so there's not a lot to say about the game, but I'm curious what interactions you had in the locker room today. It's not necessarily after the game, but the today you go in. It kind of explained to everybody that the fact that Brian Callahan's press conference was scheduled at 1:30 told us pretty quickly that Brian Callahan would be coming back. It seems like that's the decision, and by all accounts, he's coming back. We do not have any other information. I've not checked my email since we started 5 minutes ago, but I don't have any emails saying that there's a press conference by ownership or the front office at any point scheduled. So
there's not going to be a press conference by ownership. Let's not dream that dream.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, we knew that there's a Brian Callahan press conference last night. Standard fare. A couple of us have been saying throughout that Brian Callahan would be safe. Odd to many people that Amy Adams Strunk wouldn't meet with him first, but I think if she's not firing him, which she wasn't, that their conversation about what happens going forward doesn't have to precede his conversation about wrapping up the season with the press. I'm more concerned with her conversations with Rand Carthon and with Chad Brinker, whose fates we do not know at this time and may not know for, I think that could run. I would hope tomorrow we would know. It wouldn't surprise me if we didn't know until Wednesday or even Thursday, the way the Titans operate, and the way that she doesn't tend to adjust her routine or schedule for such things. So we will see. But I don't think it's some crime against humanity that she hadn't talked to the coach before this press conference.
I don't need. I'm assuming they've had a conversation at some point during the season.
He said he hadn't, during the season, but he said he hadn't talked to her today. And what the coach does on the day after the season is has exit interviews with players and talks to players and then talks to the media. And if he's not being fired, I don't see why there was a necessity for them to have a conversation before he talked to us.
No, I totally agree. And it could have already been decided by Amy weeks ago. Hey, you're coming back. Doesn't matter how this figures out. We're going to bring you back because we believe in you, X, Y, and Z. That's the conversation they've been having all year. And hopefully she has all year to make that decision. And it seems like, again, I'm not necessarily qualified, and I don't know how you feel about this. Like, do I think giving Brian Callahan a chance to come back and do it all again and sort of grow himself is an okay, smart decision? Sure. If you think there's another coach out there that you think is already proven and better and you want to make that big move, sure, there's consequences for both of them. But I know we're supposed to have opinions in this business, but I don't really have a strong opinion on Brian Callahan, who was sort of given this quarterback by the front office and given a roster that was terrible and then was supposed to be better but never got better. Some of that's on him, but I don't know if you have a strong opinion on the decision to keep Brian Callahan or not.
Well, the league, I think, is trending somewhat towards stability. I'm not wild about turning things upside down, though there are not too many guys you have to keep things stable for. Brian Callahan was a candidate for 4 other jobs last year, and Carolina and Atlanta wanted him back for second interviews. I don't know if he made it back there for second interviews or if he was held here to be hired to prevent him from going to those teams for second interviews. So 5 teams, including the Titans, thought Brian Callahan was a pretty good head coaching candidate. Does that all go away in the course of 17 games with a bad roster? I mean, he wasn't a very good head coach this year, but I just think far too many people don't allow for the possibility of him to get better. And I used this morning, who wasn't very good in his first year and a half. And I'm not saying that Brian Callahan is going to be the coaching parallel of this guy, but Derrick Henry was not very good in his first year and a half in the NFL. And it wasn't Matt LaFleur holding him back because he wanted to give carries to Deion Lewis. There was no reason to turn to Derrick Henry. He was ineffective. He got hit in the backfield constantly. He stumbled over his own 2 feet. Then he didn't really get it. And things did not click for him. Now, I'm not saying that makes it okay that things haven't clicked for Brian Callahan or whatever, but I think we simply don't allow for the possibility of somebody getting better enough, and that the course could be that you hire a new head coach, and guess what? He doesn't have a very good first year. And then in a year, you're like, well, we got to let that guy get better in his second year, and that maybe the better course is to give Brian Callahan a chance, a guy who 5 teams thought was a pretty good head coaching candidate, to get better in his second year.
Well, are you suggesting that Eddie George needs to give Brian Callahan like a win-win for the Gipper speech, like right in the middle of the season next year? That's the story around the Derrick Henry turnaround, is Eddie George gave him a good old pep talk there.
I think that Eddie George conversation was an important piece of Derrick Henry turning around. I do not think it singularly turned Derrick Henry around the way some have taken it to be, and have had conversations with people inside who maybe came to resent the way that was presented. I'm sure Tony Dews, who was we all thought was a pretty good coach here, had something to do with Derrick Henry developing. I'm sure Mike Vrabel, who also was pretty good friends with Eddie George from their college tie, had something to do with Derrick Henry coming around. I'm sure Art Smith had something to do with him coming around.
Yep, I agree with all of that. The big question here, and there's a couple comments here. Does that Henry improvement this is from Jordan. Does that Henry improvement logic extend to Rand? Jason Light struggled in his first few years. I think that's a pretty big question.
Well, Rand is going into year 3. I'm ready to see that. I think Rand's clock is different than Brian's clock.
He should already be improved at this point.
Yes.
Matt says it would be insane to blow it all up less than a year later, which gets us right back to the Rand conversation, that it's not just 1 year. He was, in part, again, we've heard it all being described as collaborative, which will be the question that I ask later on in the show, but that the Will Levis decision is on Rand as well. Like, he's part owner of that decision, and the Skoronski pick, and Spears and the rest of that draft class and that offseason as well. It's not just 1 year, it's 2, which is partly why Callahan, I think, to your point, gets some leeway when it comes to developing. What did you make of Callahan? We'll get into the number 1 pick, and we'll get into the front office having earned the trust to make all of these decisions. And Matt's point about the pros and cons of blowing it all up from a front office standpoint or not. What did you make of Brian Callahan's conversation? He basically guaranteed that there will be a different piece of competition in the quarterback room for Will Levis during his press conference today, that he will stay calling plays, which I think is good because that's why you hired him. What'd you take away from Callahan's conversation today?
I thought it was good. Thought it was forthright. Like I said, I'm a good football coach, and I'm sure that I'm going to prove I'm a good head football coach. And I understand that people haven't seen that. I'm determined to prove it. I thought Peter Skoronski spoke well in the locker room about being embarrassed, about them having the first pick in the draft as a result of them having the worst record and being the worst team, and that he's going to use that embarrassment as motivation. And then J.C. Latham kind of echoed the same thing. And I brought that to Callahan. It was really the last question of the press conference. And he said he's aligned with those guys. Nobody that's a competitor wants to be attached to something like that. And the embarrassment is motivation. Never want to be in a position like that again. And also talked about something that you and I have talked about over the weeks, that the offseason, he is going to spend a lot of time breaking down what failed him and why things didn't work, and looking for solutions to that and revising his approach as need be. And I knew full well he was going to say that. And I think full well that he will do that. And I think that part of how he comes out of that will tell us if in fact, he can be a good head coach.
Look, I don't know if Brian Callahan's going to be a championship caliber coach or not. I do appreciate the person that he is. It doesn't win you any games. It doesn't get you any extra credit with the fans. It does get you maybe a little bit of understanding from the media. Famously, Pecorine, one of the kindest, most respectful and honest people to the people that cover him throughout his entire career. And at the end of the day, that does give you a little bit of, you get a little leash sometimes when it comes to people. And he's been honest and forthright. And I think he's self-aware. I think he falls on the sword when he thinks it's his fault. I think he does. I don't think he's as good at lying as he thinks he is, because I think there's moments where you can tell he just like, he's like, I just can't say that wasn't good or that this didn't work. Like, he says it about himself, right? He blames himself, which I think is the right message. But you can tell there's moments where you can tell it's like, oh, he's holding back on that. He's holding back on that. And I respect him for that. I doesn't mean he's going to be a good coach. Being a good person doesn't tie into success or failure. But I do think it gives him a little bit. People are going to give him a little bit of the benefit of the doubt. And I think that's why he came into the weekend fairly safe with ownership. It would be part of my guess, is that this is a good guy. We like him around the building. Let's give him another chance. He's getting better. I think there's some of that. So, all right, lots of questions in here about Rand and about the front office, about Jonathan, or about JRob, and about Amy, and all kinds of stuff in here. So we'll try to get to all of this stuff throughout the course of the show. Sinkers Beverages and Shotgun Willie's Barbecue. I'm wearing two-tone blue today. I didn't mean to do that, but I am in fact wearing two-tone blue. I've got, yeah, exactly. I'm a huge homer. Shotgun Willie's Barbecue, of course, the best brisket in the city. Sinkers Beverages, a great place to go stock up on supplies for the offseason. They put on a fantastic draft party for charity every single year. I think we've done 3 years in a row. We've done that at their Sinkers headquarters in Wedgwood, Houston. And I got text messages yesterday, PK, after the game that were like, can't wait for the Sinkers draft party. People are fired up for the number 1 pick in the draft. And we're going to have a good time covering it. We're going to be down at the Senior Bowl I'm headed down there with a bunch of other guys from the 440 Sports Network. So we're going to have a lot of great coverage for you guys from Mobile coming up in a couple of weeks. The offseason is a gift that keeps on giving. I know you want pick 7. I like pick 1. I think it's good for interest. People are interested in what's going on. All right, a couple of other questions here before we move on. Let's see here. Patricia, here you go. It's ran safe. Very direct. We'll find out in 48 hours. Yeah.
Do not know. Nothing is settled on that. I would lean. Yes. I personally think that the odds of Amy Adams Strunk firing both Rand Carthon and Chad Brinker are pretty low. But I think she could fire Rand Carthon and keep Chad Brinker in add GMing to his title, or let him give GMing to somebody as he's president of football operations. And that would be some high level of continuity. And then you let Brinker and Callahan go forward together and float or sink.
Yeah. There's a lot of questions here asking about, it looked like Callahan maybe didn't think he was coming back. He hasn't talked to Amy yet. I think we're under the assumption that if he was being fired, it would have already happened. He would have already talked to the owner.
They would not have rolled him out there.
They would not have had the press conference.
To do a press conference and then fired him. That's a completely classless move.
Yeah.
And the Titans may be dumb and do dumb things, but they weren't going to do that to a guy they clearly like.
Yeah, no question about that. So I think this is exclusively the question that we have to ask. And this is, there's another question about the number 1 overall pick that I think is equally as important, but it is wrapped up into the question about trusting the power structure in the offseason to make these decisions. I don't think it's hyperbolic, and I don't think it's recency bias to say that this is the most important offseason in franchise history. This organization has not had the number 1 overall pick since 1978. It had the number 2 overall pick in 2015 through a bunch of their,
it had number 1 in 16. It traded.
Oh, that's true. That's right. They didn't make the number 1 pick, I should say. I apologize. I should clarify that. So they've had other opportunities to pick really high. They've had other opportunities to draft quarterbacks a number of times. Vince Young, Jake Locker, Marcus Mariota. We can go on and on. There's a lot of other off seasons that compare. But with the stadium coming, which I know is not relevant to the quality of play, but it is relevant to where we are in a city and in a community, especially considering wearing the Oilers uniforms on a freezing rain day where you're about to become the worst team in the league, where there's no one in the building. Like, it was a bad look on Sunday at Nissan Stadium. Is it fair to call this the most important? Is it one of the most important? How would you qualify this offseason in general before we get into the main question here?
Well, it's always easy to call the upcoming offseason the most important offseason when you've got a bad team and a team in flux. The only reason I would hesitate to call it that is because this draft is largely regarded as not that good. And so the capability of completely revamping the franchise with the picks they have or the picks they get from dealing may be limited based on the talent available in the draft. Blake Bedingfield, I did kind of a Q&A with him for his piece this morning at paulkuharsky.com. He sees 2 franchise changing players in this draft, neither of them quarterbacks. And so that's limiting. You'd like to see them trade out of that, and trading out of that would yield you maybe numbers, but with those numbers, you would be getting yourself solid players, not these kind of blue chip franchise changing players that you want. And so it's a huge offseason, but they may not be able to do as much in this offseason as you'd like based on the talent available.
Which does lead us directly into who's making the decisions. And if you're going to have a number 1 pick, it's supposed to give you the ability to revamp your franchise quickly. That's the whole point of the system, right? That's the goal of giving the worst team the first pick. It's what has built the NFL into what they are. And if you're not going to have an elite quarterback, which it seems like you clearly need, as Brian Callahan has already said, they're going to go out and get competition for Will, whether it's a young guy or a veteran.
He said at minimum competition for Will. So
that's right. That's true. And so what it does is it means you're going to have to be even better at your job. if it's not a clear-cut number one pick, if it's you don't have a third and you're going to have to go do some shrewd maneuvering to give yourself a chance to revamp the roster, you're going to have to be even better at your job. And that's not a Rand Carthon thing. That's the whole thing. That's the whole organization. That's all the people making decisions. You're going to need a great scouting department. You're going to need a great analytics department. You're going to need great guys that are underneath you. You're going to need great right-hand men and women. You're going to need all that stuff. And so ultimately the question I have for you, Paul, is collaboration was the word between Vrabel and Carthon. That wasn't true. It just wasn't. That's why Vrabel was unemployed or about to be employed somewhere else. And Rand Carthon, Chad Brinker, Anthony Robinson, they build their own power structure with the approval of ownership. They go hire Brian Callahan. What is it that it certainly doesn't appear that there's a lot of evidence that this has been extraordinarily collaborative or successful or shrewd. I think a lot of the moves that this organization has made, it's easy to look at each individual move and say, look, going to get Calvin Ridley when it became available, solid move, injected talent, cap space is somebody else's money. You got to spend it. Acquiring L'Jarius Sneed didn't work out. Bummer, but like pretty shrewd move to go get what could be the best cover corner in the league. He gets hurt. We can debate the Awuzie signing. We can debate Pollard and Cushenberry and the draft picks and Sweat and Latham and Levis is a part of Carthon's resume as well. Based on multiple years of evidence and a very kind of unique power structure inside the organization, I think it's fair to ask if we trust this group of people to make these really shrewd, calculated decisions in a critical offseason to set the franchise up long-term. I don't know the answer to that. I don't know if the answer is yes or no. I don't know if the answer is they're worthy. They've proven it, but I can't find the evidence of that. And so I'm asking you, what evidence do we have that these folks have earned the trust of the fans and the media to go out and make these critical decisions that will redefine the direction of the franchise?
I don't think they've done anything to earn the trust. I kind of am going into the offseason with the trust nothing mantra for myself. I've overestimated this team 2 years in a row. I regret it. Though not by that much this year. A lot of people were picking them to be second in the division or maybe to spring a surprise on Houston. I think most people were picking them to be second and to be a playoff contender. I picked them to be third and not to be a playoff contender.
Same.
And they're obviously been worse than that. But I'm going to move forward trusting nothing. All right. Sign a good player. And I'll say, well, it looks like a good thing, but let's see it in action. And I'm going to be much more of that, take much more of that approach. But again, not trusting them, excuse me, to say I don't trust them with the number one pick. Well, who are my alternatives to them to trust with the number one pick? And who would be choosing the people to replace them to make the number one pick? I don't know how much I trust that either. And so the devil you know versus the devil you don't know is kind of, and that all traces back to Amy Adams Strunk. And that all traces back to her dad. I mean, he was a football guy who wasn't a football guy. He was a football owner who, thought he knew more football than he did on a lot of occasions. And I don't know to what degree. I don't think she's meddling in the draft room or anything like that. I don't think she's got somebody that she loves as the number one pick in this draft or ultimately will have that's not sold to her by her football people. It's her football people that are the concern. And if it's not this set of football people, it's another set of football people that she will have chosen. And so how much do we trust her football people? Since early John Robinson and strong Mike Vrabel, we haven't had much cause to trust her football people.
Which feels like a long time ago, but it was just the last coach and the last GM. Yes. And they were both pretty good hires at the time, for a while at least.
Early stages,
no question. And I think Vrabel's, look, we don't have to relitigate this, but Vrabel's a very good football coach. Okay, a bunch of questions here I want to work through here with you PK. Sinkers, Beverages, Shotgun Willie's Barbecue. All right, Sam says, theoretically, Rand has said he is there to serve the head coach. This head coach has scouted and coached quarterbacks. Let Callahan pick his guy. Ultimately, should it be Callahan's decision? Who they pick?
I mean, I like Sam's thinking there. It's sensible. But let's not overstate. Like, Callahan has scouted quarterbacks because the Bengals are cheap and they don't have a scouting staff, right? Now, any quarterback coach / offensive coordinator is going to be involved in scouting quarterbacks, but Joe Burrow picked himself, right? There was no scouting involved in needing to pick Joe Burrow, and they would have picked Joe Burrow whether Brian Callahan liked him or not. But certainly Brian Callahan as a quarterback guy, and he reemphasized that today, that he's a quarterback guy, was disappointed in himself with what he got out of his two quarterbacks on this team. Should absolutely like / love the quarterback that they bring in, be he a veteran or a draft pick, Sam. And that's important. I just wouldn't overestimate his magic touch. I mean, he's worked with, the worst quarterback he's worked with is Derek Carr. He's touched Stafford. He's touched Peyton Manning. He's touched Burrow. I'm probably missing one more in there.
He also made Jake Browning productive.
Yeah. Well, again, that's too much credit for him. They made Jake Browning productive.
Jamar Chase.
Yeah. And so he's been around a lot of good quarterbacks. And, you hope that means good things about his ability to help choose and shape the next guy. But you don't know for sure. But I'd certainly take his track record and proximity to good quarterbacks over Rand Carthon's.
Yes.
I mean, Rand Carthon was there when they picked Brock Purdy, and those level scouts in San Francisco were involved with late draft picks. But Kyle Shanahan's going to be the guy ultimately giving his blessing on any quarterback in San Francisco.
And the only person left that was in the room making decision on Will Levis is Rand Carthon and his staff. JRob says, what exactly is the point of firing Rand and not Brinker? Are they not a package deal? What exactly does Brinker do? Go subscribe to paulkuharsky.com to learn more about that.
Brinker runs all of the football stuff that's not picking players, but he's involved in that too. He just doesn't have final say. But also all of this analytics stuff that they're incorporating that has taken time to build and that has been somewhat significant investment, I would say, certainly in personnel and financial, but more importantly, time and philosophy has been him. Now you could be a skeptic and say, well, and I understand this, saying, well, and I've told him this to his face. I've said, your stuff automatically buys you time, job security. Because you say, well, it takes 3 years for us to install this system, so you won't see the fruits of my labor until 3 years. So if I'm not here for 3 years, it won't work. But look, I've talked more to Chad Brinker than I've talked to Rand Carthon. I think Chad Brinker, to me, makes more sense than Rand Carthon. Rand Carthon puts his foot in his mouth every time he speaks. Chad Brinker, hasn't spoken publicly a lot, but I think he's done better when he has. And in my private conversations with him for stories, I think he's made more sense. He's got personnel background from a good organization in Green Bay, same way Rand did with San Francisco, but we've seen more of Rand's work product. And there's stuff not to like there. So if you're going to make a change, you can make a change to somebody in-house without tearing everything up. And then in a year, it's easier for you to say, all right, out with those guys. And I'll start with 2 fresh guys and they'll be on the same clock instead of hiring an outside GM right now and then having him fire your coach in a year and then being off schedule.
Yeah. You're lining up the coach. When you say 2 guys, you don't mean Rand and Chad. You're talking about coach and general manager. And again, some of this is the fact that they have kind of this wonky, unique power structure that not a lot of organizations have. And it opens up the door for questions about what exactly is happening? How much is everybody working together? Who's in charge of what? We sort of have it on paper, but you and I have had this conversation where when we sit down and say, well, who gets the credit or the blame for X? We don't fully know. For a long time, I thought Vrabel, and this is just going back to the previous regime, I thought there was a lot of talk when they acquired DeAndre Hopkins in the preseason that Vrabel had such a great relationship with him, that he was the one texting DeAndre during games and like that they were buddies, and that he got some credit. I'm under the impression that Rand Carthon is the reason that DeAndre Hopkins was signed and came to town. So the point is you don't fully know, even when there's a true power structure, and this one is a little bit wonky and a little bit weird. And there's a lot of folks in here saying look, Pollard can't be debated. He was good. Absolutely. No
Sure.
question. Alex says, how many praise the moves that they now dislike? And I agree. That's what I was trying to
praised almost all of them. And
Me
I'm
too.
saying I'm an idiot and I need to be more careful about that.
Right. I think ultimately there's a valuation in the moment and then there's a valuation in hindsight. And we all get hindsight to say, well, that wasn't very good. And eventually as a general manager or a coach, you are what your record says you are at some point. We can praise the moves and the decisions to go for it or draft this player or sign that player in the moment. But at the end of the day, results is what matter. Production is what matter. Let's see.
Go to Matt Mosley there. He's asking, genuinely curious what red flags I've seen from Rand. The red flags I've seen from Rand are he's turned over half the roster twice. So, I mean, the majority of the players on this roster are Rand Carthon influenced. And there are no stars on this roster. There are no game-changing players on this roster. This roster's not good. Who is anybody scared of on this roster on offense or defense? No one. That's the red flags I see. Now, people want to compare it to the end of John Robinson, which I don't think is the fair thing to do. I would compare it to the beginning of John Robinson. And in John Robinson's first draft, correct me if I'm wrong, he had Jack Conklin, Kevin Byard, and Derrick Henry. 3 guys who were all pros. Now we look at Rand Carthon's first 2 drafts. Who's going to be all pro out of these 2 drafts? I feel pretty safe saying no one.
I wouldn't go that far.
Sweat could be, maybe Latham could be, but there's a hell of a lot of competition at those spots. There are guys locked in at left tackle around the league and interior defensive line who are guys that are pretty frequently taking up those all pro votes.
Here you go, Paul. I'm joining your insider subscription tonight. There you go.
Thank you, Adam. I look forward to having.
We're gonna have a lot of great. He's gonna have a lot of great coverage on the draft. We're gonna have a lot of great coverage for you on this network on the draft as well. Just kind of scrolling up here. Why wouldn't they take Sanders if it's true that he fits Callahan's offense? I don't think Callahan knows that yet, to be honest.
Well, if he fits Callahan's offense, that's fine. But Blake Bedingfield, and I'm not saying Blake Bedingfield's scouting grades are, the law, but here's a guy who was a scout for the Titans for 19 years and still does scouting projects for NFL teams. And he thinks the guy's a second-round talent. So he could fit the scheme, but if the Titans don't see him as A, a first-rounder, or B, a number 1 caliber player, and they see Travis Hunter as clearly a number 1 caliber player, well, you can't take Sanders there. And that's how you get yourself in trouble, by forcing a quarterback into the number 1 spot who's not talented enough to deserve the number 1 spot. And I haven't watched enough of Sanders to know for sure, but my suspicion is he's not worth the number 1 pick in the draft.
So here's what I would say. And I spent a lot of time thinking about this. I talked to some folks. I think there is only one player that is worth being taken with the number 1 overall pick in this draft. There's only one guy, and it's Travis Hunter. That's it.
I mean, I don't think you're crazy for saying that by any means.
I think if you can go to 3, trade with the Giants, they go up to get either Cam Ward or Shedeur Sanders, whoever it might be that they want. You can get either Travis Hunter, Abdul Carter, or Luther Burden, whoever it might be that you love there. I think that's value, especially if you add a bunch of picks. I do think having 2 teams that want quarterbacks right behind you is beneficial. Again, Rand Carthon has not shown the ability to move down. It doesn't mean he won't be able to now, because there's a lot of you guys saying a lot of folks defending Rand, which is totally fine, because again, the metrics that we're talking about here are results, which is losses on the field. It is players being developed. It is free agents not working out. And I agree that Paul and I both were, hey, that's a shrewd move. Go get L'Jarius Sneed if you can. You signed him for whatever amount of money, $76 million. Like, you went and traded. Acquiring Ernest Jones for almost nothing was a shrewd move. He was a good player. Then you get rid of him and you gain more assets that was more than what you paid for him. That's very shrewd GMing by Rand Carthon. Acquiring DeAndre Hopkins and trading him. Shrewd move by Rand Carthon. I don't know if you saw this, but I saw Teron, of course, Teron Davenport all over Twitter basically saying, oh, there's more to that story than you know, and I can't talk about it. Well,
which story is that? Sorry.
About DeAndre Hopkins and tanking and him being traded. And it's like, well, we don't have all the information. How do we know if it's super shrewd or not? And he's being a professional about it, which I appreciate from Teron. So again, the point is in the moment, most of us are saying Calvin Ridley, they needed that. Inject the cash. It's not our money. Go spend it, right? Like you've got Lloyd Cushenberry. Go spend the money. Makes your team better. One of the best players at his position on the market. All this stuff makes sense. But at the end of the day, it has to work out for you to have done a great job. It's unfortunate. It's not fair, but it just kind of is what it is. Looking at the draft picks here, somebody said, let's go through the draft here and Rand's players.
Run through Rand's drafts. You have them?
Yep, I got it. So Peter Skoronski, first pick, 7th overall, been a good player. He's been a good player, should be a good player for a while. Is he a little overvalued?
Skoronski was 11th overall.
Sorry. He's
going to be a good guard. Is he going to be an all-pro guard? Probably not. If you're drafting a guard at 11th, does he need to be an all-pro guard? Yes.
Will Levis, number 2.
But traded up for him, terrible pick.
Okay. Tajay Spears, good player.
Part-time player. Got to have a full-time player with the 3rd round pick.
Josh Wiley.
I mean, he's second string.
Okay. Jalen Duncan.
All right, now you're getting later, but Jalen Duncan, to me is probably should be an interior guy and a backup. He's been forced into too much action. That's not his fault. He's not a tackle.
May not be on the team next year. Who knows? Maybe he is. Who knows? Colton Dowell, unfortunately, very athletic towards ACL. We don't know. 7th round receiver. Then we go J.C. Latham, Tavondre Sweat. Okay, 2 very good players.
J.C. Latham, has had a significant dip this year. I want my number 1 pick, who's an offensive lineman, to unquestionably have solved the spot by the end of his first year. Is there a little bit of a question about J.C. Latham? I mean, we're all saying he's going to be fine. And I think he's going to be fine. But ideally, your first round pick in the top 10 has no questions about him at the end of his first year, and he does.
And
Tavondre Sweat doesn't rush the passer. He had 1 sack, I think.
Which is okay. Which, by the way, I think is okay. I don't need
think
him.
It's okay.
That's not his job.
A guy 38, he needs to be in the backfield more than that guy's in the backfield. I don't want a 2-down run stuffer. I want a 3-down guy who's involved in pass rush.
What I mean to say, I don't disagree with you. What I mean to say is you don't need to sack the quarterback to be an incredibly disruptive defensive tackle.
Was he as disruptive a defensive tackle as you would want at 38?
I think playing 17 games and being a main part of the defense moving forward was a very good draft pick at 38. I'm going to give him very good.
I think you could do better. I think you can expect better from 38 as a rookie.
John Gall, no relation, said JRob had a bunch of extra draft picks too, though, because they had the number 1 pick and traded back. That was him that did that, right? That was JRob who traded back.
JRob who traded back.
Ironic.
I mean, if Rand is in position, you'll see what it does here.
Yep.
But JRob, Carthon's been busy trading up.
Cedric Gray, 4th round pick. I know people are like, oh, he played really well. Incomplete. Jarvis Brownlee, good player.
Very good pick. Very good pick. Maybe his best pick.
Jaquan Jackson, James Williams, Jalen
Horrific pick. Jaquan Jackson, horrific pick. Shouldn't be on the team next year. Serves no function as a receiver and can't be a return man.
So
Harrell. I mean, those guys being on the field, Harrell and James Williams, that's good. They've got some potential. That they're better than your average 7th round picks. But they're not going to change games for you. And Rand Carthon bragged that their late round picks were going to be like significant. He oversold them.
Out of 13 picks in 2 years, you have 4 bona fide starters: Skoronski, Latham, Sweat, and Brownlee. You have a couple of contributors in Spears and maybe Gray in the future, but incomplete. Levis was a starter for a while, but I don't know shouldn't you do better than is 4 out of 13 the right amount?
No.
I mean, it doesn't seem like it.
Not enough.
And when packaged with, again, I think it is unfortunate that Awuzie, Snead, Cushenberry, like all these guys get hurt and they were the main investments in the offseason. I think it's unfortunate, but unfortunately, that's part of the job.
And Brinker's big thing is injury assessment. They're going to predict injuries coming in. Now it sounds a little hocus pocusy. But and I don't believe you can do it, but they're claiming that they're going to be able to do it. And they sure as hell didn't do it with the injuries that they had this year. And Vrabel leaving was going to solve the injury problem. Right now, I don't believe that you can foresee a torn Achilles for Cushenberry or a Liz Frank injury for Condre Diggs. But Diggs is older, right? An older guy's more likely to get hurt, and you're relying on an older guy there. But the disproportionate injury thing continues to happen to the Tennessee Titans with a change of regime there, with a change of training staffs that everybody thought was going to be the solution, and it hasn't been a solution. So I don't know what to say about that, but it continues.
Look, there's a lot of folks comparing Rand to JRob, and this just kind of hit me. I think that's totally fair and okay to do, but if you're wanting to compare Rand Carthon, you sort of have to compare, and I think this is what Herndon has been saying all over Twitter. Somebody needs to check on Mike Herndon, make sure he's okay. He's been like power tweeting through all of his emotions the last couple of days. I think this is ultimately what it's about. This is not comparing the current regime to Mike Vrabel and John Robinson. It certainly gives us some context to understand what's happened in the past. But when you compare Rand Carthon, you're comparing him, in this case, maybe to Chad Brinker, because those are the two guys that could be making decisions. You're comparing him to options outside of the organization. You don't compare Brian Callahan to Mike Vrabel. You compare him to Todd Monken, the guy you would go hire. You're trying to compare him to the person that you think should replace them, not the person that got replaced. John Robinson was fired. Like, he should be better. Rand Carthon was hired to replace John Robinson. He should be significantly better. That's the whole point of making the move.
Yeah, Sam. At Sam's point, look, I'd take Tajay Spears over Darrington Evans for sure.
Yeah,
but some of these things, some of the players you listed, look, JRob was in a good position to get a lot of picks. Carthon's had chances to trade back, not as massively as JRob with the number 1 pick, and he hasn't. And hit rate. Everybody's going to miss. I'm not saying that JRob was perfect by any means, but JRob's early drafts were way better to me than Carthon's. And hit Patricia here.
Yep, that's what I was going to bring.
We're going to keep going with this thing. Filling out the board means putting, in the old school, putting magnets on the board physically. The people telling you where to put the magnets are over your shoulder. All you're doing is physically putting the magnets. So Ryan Cowden that year was in charge of physically doing the board, which is no longer putting magnets. It's doing the computer stuff. Was he of influence in how they stacked the board? Yes, because he was one of the chief scouting department people. But Rand was the GM. If Rand didn't have a big hand in how that board was stacked, guess whose friggin' fault that is? Rand Carthon's for sitting on his hands and zipping his lip because he's intimidated by Mike Vrabel. And if that's what Rand Carthon did, if he stayed quiet, he's an idiot.
Yep.
Because he was hired to be a GM and go GM. And because the coach is louder and more assertive than he is, he scaled back. Well, then that's a failure of hiring because I don't want a mouse as my GM.
They were supposed to collaborate, Paul. It was supposed to be collaborative. That was the whole thing. Look, Ryan Cowden, I think, was a way more valuable asset to this organization than people realize. I just will point that out. Look, lay off the Herndon dog. He's the best. This was not an attack on Herndon.
Stop attacking
I was agreeing with Herndon, who was that it's compare it. Don't compare to the previous regime. Compare to your opportunity to go hire someone better. And again, I'm not saying that they should fire Rand Carthon or Chad Brinker or Anthony Robinson or
that's not what I'm hearing.
Brian Callahan either.
We want everybody out.
Why doesn't Amy sell the team, Paul?
Yeah, right. Here we go.
So again, I think, look, the other thing is, I think you and I have said this on the show, and you've reported it, I think, is that the Will Levis, Peter Skoronski decision-making power structure was actually collaborative.
Well, the Levis pick, for sure.
Levis.
I have been told everybody involved in that, all the key players were on board with that.
That's it. And I think that's actually probably an okay way to look at it, because we have this weird year where these two guys clearly didn't get along and didn't want to work together and ended up not working together. And I don't think it's fair to anybody to say that was definitively one thing or the other. I really don't. I think you just have to put it on both of them and say, look, it was a bad year. Carthon was there. Vrabel was there. They both were involved. They drafted Levis. That's it. And I think you kind of have to
it was a bust.
And it was bad.
A bust for the value.
No question, and trading up to get him. And again, this is where Callahan gets a little bit of a pass because he didn't pick Will Levis. And I think it's fair to say that Brian Callahan learned pretty quickly that Will Levis was not going to be the guy. I think it's pretty clear that that's what happened. So again, a lot of you in the comments, and I respect all you guys. You guys are all saying, don't blow it up. Let's stick with the group. Let's see what happens. I think that's totally fine. What happens if it does? What happens if everything we've seen so far, which has not necessarily been all these positive results because it's a results-oriented business. What happens with this? How do we evaluate this offseason if it all happens again and we're right back where we started in week 7 and they're 2-5? Do you think everybody's going to survive then? Because they're not going to.
Nobody's surviving then. Trouble in River City. I ultimately don't disagree with what Sam's saying here in the comments. I've not pushed for Rand Carthon to be fired, but I understand a case by some for him to be fired. I ultimately want the GM and the coach to be on the same clock, and I think it's too early to fire the coach. And so I'm content with keeping everything together for one more go round. And I suspect that's what's going to happen. And if that doesn't happen, I think the next most reasonable thing is Brinker.
Agreed. So here's the thing. That means trading out of the first pick is super important to me, or not drafting a quarterback to try to save your job. It is hard for me, and I've studied this a little bit more than you have. There's certainly people that have studied it way more than I have, but it is hard to, when I put together a list of players, it is almost impossible to get Shedeur Sanders into my top 10, Paul. It's hard. And Cam Ward takes too many risks. He doesn't protect the football. He thinks he can do everything. He's a great college quarterback.
That sounds like Will Levis.
It's exactly like Will Levis.
Somebody that is opposite of Will Levis.
Yes.
Premium on getting this quarterback, veteran or rookie, good decision maker, doesn't turn the ball over, processes well. Opposite of Will Levis.
I agree. So here's I'm on the record as saying this. The only football player worth drafting in this class with the number 1 overall pick is Travis Hunter, full stop, period.
If I force you to take somebody else first.
For the Titans?
Yes.
Probably Abdul Carter from Penn State. I think he helps the team. He is an elite talent. He does all the things you need. He is better than the quarterbacks. Here's the other thing. I would take Jalen Milroe at 18 or 20 or 22 before I would take Sanders or Ward.
Hush your mouth. I don't want Sanders or Ward either, but I sure as hell don't want Jalen Milroe.
I think
Jesus,
but it doesn't
work.
The
Titans would get a whole new fan base again.
It doesn't work with Callahan though. If you want to go Jalen Milroe in the second round, let's say, and do something like Jalen Hurts, I think that's a different strategy. That is a totally different philosophy. And then you're pivoting the organization in a different direction at that point. So I don't think that's an option, but I would take Jalen Milroe in the second round before I would take Sanders or Cam Ward, and which means must-lie season. You got to convince everybody that you're taking one of those quarterbacks, and you got to drive up the value of the pick. Then you need to trade down and take a better player. And if I'm Amy Adams Strunk, what I am saying, to your point, to wrap up the conversation around the front office and the changes that may or may not be coming, if I'm Amy Adams Strunk, this is what I'm saying to the team. I'm sitting the power structure down, and I'm saying, look, make my roster better with more players and more picks. Let's not hitch our wagon to a quarterback that we don't think really belongs in that slot in the draft that's really that good, that's going to save us. Let's build the roster, and I'll give you a chance to go prove that you guys all did your job well. Callahan, Carthon, Brinker, all of y'all. Go build a better roster, and I'm not going to hold it against you that we don't have an elite quarterback. But that's what I'm saying if I'm Amy Adams Strunk. And then I'm saying, you guys got to prove it to me this year in 25. And if you guys do that, you're all coming back the next year.
You can also prove it to her that Shedeur Sanders or Cam Ward's not an elite quarterback by sitting down and showing her 10 minutes of tape of their worst stuff, saying, look, we can't make this work. Here's why they're not an elite quarterback. And we're not passing on elite quarterbacks here. They're not elite. Somebody's going to overdraft them. John Mara is going to make another mistake here. And we don't want to be those people. We can have Hunter instead, who's going to be a generational talent, conceivably, and catch a couple touchdowns on top of getting 8 interceptions.
I'm actually, you know what I'm doing now? I've talked to some folks that might be going, if I'm the Titans, it might be the other way. He might be the receiver. He might be a really good number 1 receiver alongside Calvin Ridley, and then can play some other things. He helps your punt return game, your special teams game right away as well. He is an elite talent that makes your football team better. Is he traditional pick at number 1? Absolutely not. Is he a traditional player in the truest sense of the word? Absolutely not. I don't believe he's a true lockdown cover corner, especially not in man coverage, which is what Denard Wilson wants him to be, or all of his corners to be. I think he's more likely an impact player on offense for the Titans in particular. but I want them to pick 3rd or 5th or 7th and trade down and get more picks because
Well,
that actually makes the team
3rd,
better.
and they're probably not getting them at 5th.
But I'm okay with the other players at those spots is what I'm saying. There's a lot of other good players at those picks. There's no one else that deserves to be number 1. No one.
Well, you really need the Giants to love Sanders and for them to think that you want him. Look, if you go sign Derek Carr, it's going to be pretty clear that you're not drafting Shedeur Sanders. I don't know. Maybe you could sell it. Hey, here's our bridge guy, and we're going to bring in Sanders and bring him along slowly. And we needed 2 quarterbacks. Even put it out there that you're trading Levis, even if you can't. I can't sell it as an idea and sell the Giants on the fact that you're doing a 2 quarterback thing. And so that they'll come up and really knock your socks off.
When did the Vikings sign Darnold? Didn't they sign him way before drafting? I mean, they signed him early and then went and drafted McCarthy, right? Same thing with the Falcons. I think, John says in the comments, the Falcons did the same thing, right?
But they're drafting McCarthy at 11, not at 1.
That's totally valid. Totally valid. I think they need to, there's a reason that there was a report yesterday. Oh, the Titans like Cam Ward. It's must-lie season, and teams need to know the value of the pick. So I expect to see more of that.
Just don't. If you're watching this, if you're listening to this, don't buy any of that. I mean, the Titans have no strongly formulated opinion. We've been here before with the reports, but that they have, Rand Carthon might have a strong inkling as to what he likes, but if he's got something that's not mobile in terms of being influenced by the coach whose fingerprints we want on this player, who's not looked at anybody yet, that's a reason to fire Carthon, I think.
And look, we're just media guys here. I'm not going to pretend to know that Shedeur Sanders is or is not going to be a superstar. Again, I have a tough time getting him into the top 10. I have a tough time getting Cam Ward into the top 15. And I know half of you guys in the comments think it's absurd. And I think somebody said this correct. I think John said it. Like, if you're going to hire Todd Monken and do a totally different offense, then I do think Jalen Milroe is a better player than the other two. But I think he has to be in the right system and the right structure. And that is not what Brian Callahan does. That's not what he wants. He wants processing and accuracy. He said it today. He goes, we need less turnovers, fewer sacks, better pocket presence, consistent X plays, and completion percentage and leadership. That's what he said he's looking for. There's a lot of that Sanders does. He hasn't really played an offensive system. I got to be honest.
He takes a lot of sacks.
Well, and he plays backyard ball, which means he's very talented, but he's not operated within a system. Cam Ward's played more in a system. The problem is Cam Ward thinks he can do everything. And in college, he has been able to. At Incarnate Word, he could. At Washington State, he could. At Miami, it cost him a trip to the playoff because they made mistakes. And he plays hero ball all the time. They're both very good college players. I just don't see. I see the Kenny Pickett draft class. Now, if you tell me, Quinn Ewers in the 3rd, Carson Beck in the 3rd, Jalen Milroe in the 2nd, like I could get around with some of that stuff.
3rd round quarterback's not.
But they're not. That's not going to save your team. It's not going to save your team. You trade from 1 to 3, 1 to 5, 1 to 7. You get an extra 2nd or a 3rd pick. Stockpile, make your team better, and tell the people in charge, go to work, make it all better. Show me you deserve the job next year. And that's what we've been saying that for the better part of, whatever, the last 10 months or so. Shotgun Willie's Barbecue Sinkers Beverages. And if you want to learn what Chad Brinker does, paulkuharsky.com. Nice article up there. There's a lot of words in that piece that you wrote. So
outlines all of the analytics stuff. You can
there you go.
Find that there. Ward's just a fancier Levis, Sam says.
I tend to agree with
we're
that.
both kind of with that.
Yeah.
Upside's lovely and downside's ugly.
I have Mason Graham at number 2, and the Titans don't need him. So this is a very weird draft for the Titans to get the number 1 pick. It's unfortunate. It is what it is. And it means the folks in charge making the decisions have to be even better at their jobs. They have to be very good at what they're doing this offseason. I'm not suggesting it's easy to make this team significantly better with one less pick, the number 1 pick, and no clear-cut quarterback to take. It's not easy, but you don't take these jobs because they're easy. You take these jobs because they're hard and because you love competition. So we shall see. We shall see what happens. Paul, what do you got coming up on the website?
Much more coming out of Brian Callahan's thing. I have a Titan who has a connection to Travis Hunter and offers a full endorsement. So I'll have a short piece on that coming up. I've got a lot of guys talking about their worst season that they had in football and before this one. Some of them were worse than this one. And what they took out of that and how they spun that forward. So we'll get to that at some point this week. But I'm still expecting, we're going to learn something about who the GM is or isn't of this football team. And so a lot of reaction and rationale to that coming up as soon as it happens.
I think it is totally fair. There's a lot of folks that made really good points in the comment section.
That's good contribution.
Yeah, and I'll end on this. We appreciate all you guys tuning in. Share the product, share the show. Paul and I are back every Monday. Suss and I, Nick Sussai from the Tennessean on Thursdays. You got the Paul Kuharsky podcast on Thursdays as well. I think it is okay because there's a lot of you guys that were sort of defending Rand and the decision making over the next 2 years. We're all saying, you and I are saying, Paul, like, let's agree that they're going to run it back and let's see what happens. I'm totally fine with that strategy. I don't have an issue with it. I also think it's fair to ask the questions. Do we have enough evidence to trust this group of folks to handle one of the most important off seasons in franchise history? And there's plenty of arguments on the other side of that equation, which is we haven't seen enough huge home runs to totally just put our trust in these people. The in JRob we trust thing was because there were so many great moves in the first 3 years. It was not just, they had the greatest improvement in the history of the franchise. They went from 2 wins to 9 wins in 1 year. And John Robinson was in charge of that. So that whole thing happened because of huge success early. We haven't had that yet, but we got another year. Let's see.
And does the collaborative structure produce results? I don't know if it does or it doesn't, but show us something. Give us an illustration of where it benefited you in some great way, or tell us how you're tinkering with it. I don't know. With collaboration brings some transparency. Look, Brian Callahan's been incredibly transparent.
Yeah.
Right now you're in the what Rand Carthon calls his season. He part of the reason he doesn't like to talk during the season is because he says it's the coach's season. Well, all right, Rand, we're out of the coach's season. If this is still your job, let's hear from you.
I agree. If it's collaborative, show us your work a little bit. Explain where it works, how it works, where the success was. Again, a lot of decisions in the moment. We all said that's a pretty good move, but results are what matter, and there hasn't been any results so far for most of these. Pollard has been very good, right? Tony Pollard, very good player.
Ridley's a number 2, but I mean he's an upgrade on what they had in the room after a shaky start.
Sweat, Latham. Good players, Kuharsky, good players. That's where we're at here. The other moves, Ernest Jones was a good move. They went and got Ernest Jones, flipped him for more draft capital. DeAndre Hopkins came in, was a very good player for them at a pretty affordable price, got them some draft capital back. Now, do I think that they should have attached 60% playing snap counts to get their escalators? Maybe they shouldn't have done that because he didn't hit those marks for the Chiefs.
Didn't have a choice, I would think.
Well, yeah, I tend to agree with that. Although I do believe that DeAndre Hopkins' snap count's going to go way up now that they're in the postseason. So, all right, there you go. One of the most important off seasons in the franchise's history, and the folks in charge got to prove that they are worthy of it. We'll see what happens. The coach seems to be coming back. We'll find out in the course of the next couple of days if the rest of the staff is coming back in terms of the front office. I assume you anticipate staff changes coming, as Callahan said he's going to do those interviews tomorrow, basically, right?
Yeah, unsure.
Yep. All right. We'll see. Okay. Anything else you want to add? I think that's about it. Make sure you go check out Sinker's Beverages, 4-time liquor store of the year. They have results, guys. Sinker's Beverages has put skins on the wall. 4-time champion liquor store of the year in Nashville. And of course, Shotgun Willie's Barbecue just named best brisket in the city, best barbecue in the city. So check them out as well. Right up there in Madison, right off Briley Parkway. Great place to go eat from 11 to 3 on Wednesday through Sunday. Otherwise, I think that's about it. PaulKuharsky.com is the website. Appreciate all you guys in the comments section. We will hang out and talk to you next week. I'll be back on Thursday with Nick Suss. For Paul, I am Braden. Thanks for listening. We'll talk to you guys next time.
Cheers.
Peace and love.